Great. Okay, so moving on to status updates. I guess I can share something that I've been kind of looking into a little bit recently, which is in regards to our CI pipeline or workers. We had some issues that kind of required us to go ahead and update the runners themselves. And in doing so, we got the latest version of Docker Desktop, which kind of brought on a slew of issues that I've posted in the CI Slack channel. I've since then just pinned to an older version of Docker Desktop, and I haven't gotten the time to go back and really dig into exactly what all the issues are and how to like really remedy them, since it seems like it's going to impact a number of contributors at least, since our tests are failing due to some changes in, I believe, networking for the most part. Um, I believe Dan might be taking on some of that to look into it, but I'll let him speak to that. Other than that, still poking at Tecton catalog for them to be able to essentially merge in our tasks and pipeline. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, so I'll continue to poke. Alternatively, I did discover that the hub, which is like a UI similar to the Buildpack registry, what they'll let you search for stuff, is going to allow for different catalogs. So I think we could kind of branch off, and instead of using and relying on the central Tecton catalog, we could kind of host our own, similar to how we do for Homebrew. And hopefully this will enable us to do releases in a more, timely fashion. Still eyeing that. I posted the proposal as an issue in the Tecton integration repo, but I'll probably be creating an RFC once that really becomes something that's a capability. All right. Sorry, that was all of mine. Anybody else want to give a status update?
Slightly related, I was, or to your CI adventures, I was trying to reproduce those issues on various different versions of Docker Desktop for Windows. Nothing too interesting yet. I'm still on old versions that seem to be passing, so I'm about to bump it up to the newer version, so I'll let you know what I find. And also separately working on the image util related changes to fix the cache image bug, where cache images are created for Linux when you want them to be Windows. And there's various PRs out that are getting reviewed, but I think most of the code is complete there. The only relevant bit is there might be some registry changes that are there that could, that are based on what Pack currently has, but potentially a little bit simplified. Could be some workarounds for the CI issue if push comes to shove. But since I have context on that part of it, I'll keep looking at it.
Cool. And that is in the image util repo or library, is that right?
It is, yep, and it's currently a PR. I'll throw a link to it in the notes here.
Cool. Yeah, if you could get that working with the latest version of Docker Desktop, that would be interesting, because then hopefully we'd just be able to consume that and get rid of our implementation in Pack.
Yeah, I'm not super hopeful that it will behave all that much differently, but it would potentially let us not use net host for everything. Makes it easier to use nat, so it might eliminate one problem instead bring up another. But we'll see. I'll try it out, but I'll send the link over here.
Cool.
Sorry, that's my update.
Yeah, so I guess this week, most of what I've been working on is kind of some issues that come up because of differences in our TCP configuration and the lifecycle, and that on Docker Hub. But I would imagine that some of these changes will be pretty relevant for any time we're fetching Buildpacks as well, just since, yeah. we're basically just using a lot of the default Golang stuff, and Docker Hub doesn't like that when you start doing a lot of things in parallel. So
Interesting. Cool. All right. Anything else for status updates? Okay. Next, release planning. As I made mention, Tecton's still kind of stuck in the review process. I do maybe want to touch on Pack. I know it's scheduled for next week. Is that accurate? Should we start CCB feature complete today or tomorrow? I don't know. I haven't spoken to David here recently, but that's probably something we want to discuss. I don't know if David, if you have any input into that, or Dan.
I don't happy with whatever you decide.
Cool. So, you know, if people aren't aware, David is in the middle of a transition right now, employment wise. So that's partly the reason why he's probably a little bit absent right now. So I'm gonna try to either communicate with him, or if not, just step in for this release and make sure that we clean up the milestone to make sure that we have the things that we want to have in this release. I know that there's a very particular issue that Emily and Jesse are running into right now in regards to creating builders and essentially duplicate layers for build packs, and some of those not necessarily matching as far as their digest goes. So digging into that, I think that might be of high urgency to try to get into this release. So I'll continue to look at that. But yeah, I'll probably just take on the release, like I said. So more to come there. I'll keep talking about it in the platform channel. Okay, anything else for release planning? Questions, comments, concerns?
It might be worth noting that we're planning to ship the life cycle, soon, right? It's feature based, but I think all of the issues that we need to get into the next release are currently in flight. So if it ends up being the case that we are going to ship at about the same time, is it worth packaging the latest life cycle in as the default in Pack?
So in its current state, I know we have an issue in Pack that should essentially look at the latest supported API version, right? And I think that should be true like going forward, no matter what, for the life cycle. So that should simplify it. But because we don't have that change right now, I'm somewhat hesitant, because if there is an issue with the life cycle soon thereafter that requires a patch, it would require Pack to also ship a patch. So I'd rather have some sort of intermediate time in which, people could obviously still use the newest version of the life cycle, but it would be more explicit, right? And then once everything gets ironed out, then we should bump it on Pack for the next version. I think that's been our working model, and I think it's worked pretty well so far.
That's good.
A good call out. All right. If there's nothing else there, we can move on to discussions needed. The purpose of this exercise is to look at any of the items in our issue board and see whether or not there are anything that we want to discuss at this point in time. Okay. You are able to see the issues board, right? Cool. All right, so the first one we have is Pack build pack packages should not require the package TOML in all circumstances. I believe I added this to the agenda. Yeah, here, because there's a PR from Sam who is with us today that kind of addresses this for the most part. but there are some discussions about some options that we want to consider there. Next one is an RFC. That one is still blocked right now. I believe the spec changes haven't made it through. Okay, store image in local Docker daemon when using, oh yeah, this one. All right, I guess maybe we could finish up this one. So the GGCR debug logging, I think I made a request, Dan. I believe you have some more context here. If you could provide that, that'd be great. So store image in local Docker daemon when using pack build publish. I've read through this, but honestly, I'm not sure I really gather exactly what we're going to do, especially as we're making changes already to like cache volume, cache image, and so on. I see your name on here, Dan. Do you have any update as to like what the status of this particular issue is?
Yeah. So I think like the basics are that this person wants to be able to push a cache image, right? But keep his the built artifact locally. And because we have like one publish flag, it seems that like manages how permissions get funneled into the lifecycle, and then we use the creator. It feels like any split between having everything go to the registry or everything stay local is like a little bit awkward, but I guess doable. I think it's like reasonable.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So we're talking about just the cache image, right? We're not talking about the app image and wanting that to be both persisted locally and published.
Yeah,
to the
just
registry.
locally. It's like splitting the two.
It's interesting. And I think one of the proposals was to have a new flag, like publish
Yeah.
cache image or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if this is worth having an RFC around, because I feel like at least for me, I want to like really grasp exactly what the proposal is, right? Like what a possible solution or set of possible solutions could be. And make sure that the UX aligns with what the default expectation would be, and then also enable all the knobs in a sensible way to be able to configure it exactly how I guess this individual desires. And then the last but not least is make sure that there's enough of a desire, right, to warrant maybe the complexity. But I think that could be discussed after we've gotten the proposals.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, I'll see if this person wants to like collaborate or drive that out. If they don't, it's probably a piece of work I can pick up.
Yeah, and again, it might just be that the desire is not quite there, right? Because I don't know, again, I didn't read this like in depth, but it seems like Emily might have some other opinions or options that might be suitable as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's see. I guess, do you
Oh.
mind taking this on so we're not here? Sorry, someone's going to speak.
Well, and I just had a comment. I don't know if this is all that relevant, but I remember one of the options was like pushing to a local registry. So like still publishing, but publishing to, still on your workstation. And I remember that we talked about some kind of workflow for Pack that made use of a like either a temporary local registry or something like that. So I don't know if that's necessary to explore in this issue, but it's something that could come up.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, but yeah, I think they're slightly, separated or separated enough that the use case, I guess maybe I don't see it as tied to it, but it could be, to your point, right? So I just added the label to it. And then I'm gonna go ahead after this meeting, add some comments on here as to why we would want this to be an RFC based on the comments I made earlier.
Are we leaving, I guess, an invitation for the person who opened this issue to drive that RFC, or are we? What, I forgot where we landed there.
Yeah, so my stance is we would need an RFC, and I would put exactly what why we would need an RFC, right? Like the things that we would be looking for in an RFC. How to proceed, I think that's really up to the author or anybody therefore interested in facilitating. Cool. All right, anything else on that one? Okay, bringing it back, I believe we went through all the issues that apply right now. Okay, moving on to standing RFCs. So you know what, before we go into the RFCs, I know we're kind of running short on time. I wonder if we should also expand this meeting now that we have a little bit more discussion in this arena as opposed to other working group meetings. So if nobody opposes, I would propose that we bump this meeting up to an hour. Any objections to that?
In general, definitely, I can't do today, but
Cool.
Yeah, I'm +1, but I definitely have a conflict in the next half hour. That's probably okay too.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think of it as going forward, and I'll just increase the time wherever we need to. And ultimately, if we finish early, obviously we'll drop off as well. Cool. Let's see. Since we do have Sam, does anybody mind if we bump this one up in the agenda? Cool. All right. So I guess maybe to give a little bit of context on this. So this is in relation to the build package command, right? And previously it required you to have a config parameter where you would point it to a package.toml file. There was another PR that Joe created where this config file was optional, right? You just basically ran the command without passing that flag, and it would look locally. I don't remember if it would actually look for the package.toml file, but essentially it would treat the local directory, look for the buildpack.toml, and just kind of do everything off of the local directory. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sam. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it tries to provide like a dummy minimal package.toml file. So it essentially creates one with URI set to the current directory. But that was the implementation that was there in the previous PR.
Right. Yep. So it created, yeah, that dummy package config file. And now the proposed change from Emily was to have an additional flag called Buildpack, right? And then this Buildpack flag would allow you to, instead of specifying a package.toml file, to point to a directory, if I'm not mistaken. And this directory would be a Buildpack directory, right? So it would have a Buildpack toml, it would have the bin directory, like all the bits for the Buildpack. Or simply just an order if it was like a meta Buildpack. The part where I kind of had some questions about was it overriding the Buildpack URI if you provided both the config and the Buildpack flag. And additionally, I wasn't a huge fan of the Buildpack name because I felt like when you attach it to a Buildpack, it just, the context or the syntax doesn't make sense when you think about like pack build, when you specify multiple build packs and that sort of stuff, right? So we talked about it a little bit more, and I think where we're kind of hung up right now is in two options, right? Where we have option one, which is a path for all. So we have a single parameter that's called path, and it could take a buildpack directory, a package toml formatted file, or a buildpack file. I think someone, Ryan, requested that it also take a tarball, right? So you could point it to a URL or a tarball that's already been a prepackaged build pack, and it would just work. For option 2 is we would have still a config for a project toml file and then a path to a build pack directory, right? And I would assume in this case, it would also could be a tarball of a build pack for this path. Now, the slight difference here is that these would be mutually exclusive so that there's no like weird edge case of if you pass in both the config and the path, something happens underneath where I think like the build pack URI was being adjusted. I hope I did this, explanation some good, but I don't know, Sam, if you have more to add here.
No, makes sense. The the only question I had was like, which of these files are like actually in the spec, which are unofficially assumed to be in the spec, or they're planned to be in a future extension spec, and then which of these are just like conventions for pack? Because for me, that was the confusing part in implementing this PR. Like, does that package toml file have to be called package toml, or can it be anything? Um, and I guess the build pack toml is in the spec, so there's no confusion around that. But mainly for me, it was like whether package.toml is like an official file, whether it's a pack concept, or whether it's a proposed extension to the spec in the future.
My understanding historically is that because it's a configuration solely for a pack operation, right, which is the packaging, it is therefore a pack specific configuration file and therefore outside of the spec. The only thing that we've spec'd out in regards to packaging is the format for which we create the package, right? And so that should be in the distribution spec. I guess another similar file would be the builder toml file, which is a configuration for pack on how to create the builder. But the builder spec talks mostly about how the builder is structured and not the configuration for an operation that creates the builder, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if it is just pack specific, like do like does it make sense to have it named something else? And if it is named something else, how would we detect it?
Okay.
Like,
And we're talking about this section here, is that right?
so I was talking about option 1, where it's a single path for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And like, let's say if it's an improperly formatted file, for whatever reason, how do we differentiate between an improperly formatted buildpack.toml file or a properly formatted package.toml file? Because if the, let's say, like if we allow package.toml to be any free form file, I don't think there's anything stopping people from simply calling it buildpack.toml, for example. So that was my main point of concern. Like, if we don't have like this specification around what that file is called, and we have a single option to auto detect this, it might be hard to understand like which file it's actually talking about.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Does the build pack toml, does that require the API field at the top level, or
uh,
does it default?
I think it does in the recent. I'm not sure.
So assuming that it is required,
Yes.
right? Like that could be the differentiator there, right? Like the thing that we look at
Yeah.
to
I mean,
switch over.
yeah. What's stopping someone from combining package.toml with buildpack.toml? I mean, if there are extra keys, what's wrong with that?
That's a good question. I don't know the extent of the validation at the different layers, right? I know that there's been discussions, uh, like especially right now, talking about the life cycle, right? And the life cycle having additional validation for certain configuration files and whether extra keys should be allowed or not. And I think the majority are leaning towards being a little bit more strict, in which extra keys would essentially be thrown out or error out. So that might be the determining factor there.
Okay, because if it's just thrown out from a pack perspective, there's nothing stopping from a Buildpack author putting these extra keys in pack like buildpack.toml and pack using that to
Mm-hmm.
create the initial configuration and then passing it to the lifecycle, which just throws it away. If it errors, then it's a different case entirely. Um, but that was my only like confusion with option one. Like, how do you differentiate between all of the different, like the two different toml files?
Yeah. I wonder, so that's the discussion and complexity for option one, right? What about option two? Um, basically having the dash dash config tell you that it's a package toml configuration, and the dash dash path simply replacing what is, named build packs in this PR.
That, I mean, that I think is what it currently already sort of does, where like dash dash path is set to the current working directory. So that would be compatible with the existing CLI, and I don't think there's a chance for it to be mistaken for one or the other. Like the only additional logic there would be to change the working directory from the current one to a different one for the build pack itself. But that's
Yeah.
easier to deal with.
And then we're okay with making config and path mutually exclusive. Sorry.
I think if we want to avoid that behavior where the URI is being overridden, then I think it makes sense to have those to be mutually exclusive. Um, because I couldn't think of a use case either. The reason I implemented it was because it was mentioned in the original issue. But
Right.
um, I, I think it would make sense if you have both a path and a config. It doesn't make sense because your package.toml should contain a relative path to your build pack anyway,
Yep.
or
That
or
makes sense.
some other URI. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm perfectly fine with going with option two if that's where we're leaning more towards.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So the actual change would be simply changing the build pack flag to a path flag, right? And
Yes, and
it
then
was
the mutually exclusive part.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. And then to Ryan's comment, I could reply, or I don't know if you don't mind replying. Uh, that's a really good idea, but I would probably defer that into a separate issue.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So it does seem like we're at time for today. Do we want to continue going? And is there anything that we should be talking about?
I have nothing after this, so I'm free, but yeah.
Are the people that brought up these topics present? I guess that should be the other question.
I think that I can talk about the, let's see, the refactoring RFC. I think that was on the agenda somewhere, or we can just do that asynchronously. Probably take people a quick read through.
Yeah, I'm okay with doing it right now. I don't have anything either.
Natalie, Sam, does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just observing, so
I'm happier. So he, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I don't think this will take too long, but so this is kind of a continuation. I guess some background. The proposal that this RFC kind of wants us to move towards is changing the structure of the pack repo from something like this to something with a little bit more just like generic organization, you could say, where we have this PKG directory and then a bunch of packages inside of it that are all exported and external consumers can use them. And the first go through of this RFC, a lot of what we were getting stuck on is exactly like what the names are, what belongs in here, what are the possible other commands that we are going to have. Do we really want those? And so in the last platform sync, I think we came up with Javier proposed a kind of good idea, which was that we probably are more worried about the process about how we want to pull stuff out and just the like more generic, oh, we do want to have some bits of functionality to get pulled out into packages, and then eventually if they need to be pulled out into their own repos, or additionally we add some external commands that other platforms might want to use. So I guess this is just like how this should look eventually, where we have a bunch of unorganized stuff right now, extract code from internal into here. We don't really want to define exactly what this looks like all the way. We can pull some stuff out into individual commands, and eventually we have some packages like I believe archive that are probably going to be pulled out into their own individual repository because they're used across a couple different repos that we have. So I guess with that said, this is kind of like a first goal, or like the first goal post that we'd want to potentially try and get to. And it's okay if we're going through this kind of like refactoring process and decide these aren't quite the right seams that we want to pull out. That's fine. I don't want to have to submit another RFC if that is the case. And then this would be a potential future where we've pulled more stuff out, we have some additional CLIs, etc.
Cool. I like it a lot. Yeah, this totally makes sense. I wonder, like very, small nitpick here, but I wonder if we can make it more obvious that, this is like the current structure. I guess maybe that's my first question. Do we already have a PKG on the current structure for archive?
Yeah, we do.
Interesting. And that's the only thing in PKG?
It's the only thing.
What? Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah.
See, it's things like that we didn't even know happened. All right. Okay, so that is the current structure. Then second and third. Cool. So maybe like labeling phases or making a more like specific naming strategy, right? Like current structure after this RFC and long term or something like that, right? Something that tells people like, hey, don't make sure that you're thinking about it in the right context for each one of these.
Yeah. Okay.
But other than that, it looks really, really good.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Can easily do that.
Okay. Anything else on this? Cool. All right. So it seems like I've got a few action items. I'll definitely extend this meeting to an hour starting next week, which I won't be here. Yeah, I'll be out on vacation, but I'm sure someone will take care of it. And yeah, start doing that. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you all online.
Okay.
See ya. Have a good one.